Program Director, Acting Mayor, SAIMI Chair, all departments present, all dignitaries present, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, good morning.
Good morning.
Many months ago, we made a tryst with destiny. And now the time comes that we may redeem that tryst, maybe not as a whole or in full measure, but quite substantially. Jawaharlal Nehru's words were echoed by the country's leadership in 1994 when the country stood at the cusp of democracy. Since then, several programs have been undertaken by government, including the RDP, GEAR, ASGISA, and now the National Development Plan. This was meant to redeem the nation's tryst with destiny. South Africa has a vision to remake and redefine the country and therefore the economy by 2030. It sets targets for the various sectors and guide government planning through the next 11 years. This is a tool meant to guide society and to garner society into a common vision and set the economy onto a highest growth trajectory. However, we needed a way to achieve the vision. We needed some strategy and methodology to achieve that vision. And we chose the BFR methodology to help accelerate the realization of that vision and bring about a significant reduction of the growing gap between wealth and destitution that is characterized by poverty and unemployment. Since 2014, several Operation Pakistan labs have been undertaken. To be precise, 7 of them have been undertaken. The Oceans Economy Lab was undertaken in 2014 as the first one, or the so-called guinea pig. And the lab sought to answer a question of how best do we grow the sector in order to raise its contribution to the economy. To do so, we needed to look at where we are. Several of you or your organizations were in that lab, where we had to determine where we are as a country so that we can then look at where we're going and how far we can get there annually. At that point, it was determined that thousands of vessels reported at South African ports. It was also reported that the ocean's economy contributed 54 billion rands to the GDP and also employing 316,000 people. Several sectors were identified within the ocean's economy, amongst which number we can count the MTM, which was said to be contributing 15 billion at the time. Coastal and marine tourism was said to be contributing 16 billion, and offshore oil and gas, a meager 4 billion. There was also an acknowledgement that we had an antiquated infrastructure, and the infrastructure was also insufficient to can achieve our vision. Further to that, we looked at the various sectors in detail, and we discovered that the offshore oil and gas was producing very little relative to the resources that were available at that time. The estimate stood at 9 billion oil resources and 11 billion oil equivalent of gas. But then when we looked at the production of the offshore oil and gas sector, we found it to be very little. Going across to aquaculture, we compared it with other countries and we found it produced very little and employed very few people compared to countries that are similar or of similar coastline length as South Africa. If we took Egypt, we found Egypt at that time employed 580,000 in aquaculture sector alone. compared to South Africa's aquaculture employment of 2,000 plus. Further to that, Egypt produced 1,000-fold of our production. And then we moved on to the MPG sector, and we found that we had various acts regulating the ocean's governance space, which was a nightmare for any regulator. I'm trying to look at where we were so that we can see how far we've come in relation to what we have planned. Then what then happened is we sat down and we planned to change the picture. We looked at the way of reimagining the way we do business to take advantage of the geostrategic location of the country so as to exploit the resources that are within our exclusive economic zone, some of which were found to be of grave national and global geosignificance. Now we had Operation Phakisa Lab. For the first time, South Africa incorporated, brought together the distinctive capabilities of the private sector, the public sector, as well as civil society, to plan together as a nation. And in so doing, we broke away from what is called the conflict of different jurisdictions, commonly known as the silo mentality. This brought about a seismic shift in the tectonic plates underpinning delivery as well as development as we know it. At the end, we came up with a plan that recognized several sectors, including aquaculture, coastal marine tourism, marine transport and manufacturing, offshore oil and gas, small harbors development, and MPG as things that will accelerate the development of the sector and significantly raise its contribution to the GDP. Continued implementation of Operation Phakisa reveals that we have attracted so far 41.1 billion rands of investment, and we have created less than 10,000 jobs. But then the question is, relative to what? How do we compare? The aspiration was to grow the GDP contribution of the sector by 177 billion and create 1 million jobs by 2033. Now, this is 5 years. It's not the 16, 17 years horizon that we used for planning. Now, let us bring this to today's terms. We were supposed to have grown the GDP by 32 billion this year and created 77,000 jobs. Now, let us look at what has happened. If we look, or we assume a linearity constant between investment, which is 41.1 billion, and the GDP, we can happily say we have somehow surpassed the 32 billion that we were supposed to have created by now. But can that be said of employment creation? The answer is decidedly no. We were supposed to have created 77,000 jobs, and I've said the direct jobs that we have created amount to less than 10,000. But that's only direct. If we were to argue that if we took indirect jobs into account, we would be close to achieving the target. I want to say no. Even if you argued like that, I would disagree with you. We would not have met that target. If we take a sector, offshore oil and gas stroke, the minerals sector, that has a highest multiplier effect of 6.6, and argue that we're going to use that across all sectors, regardless of the fact that it's not offshore oil and gas, we would have been at less than 66,000. That's very optimistic, but we're not there. So we have not achieved that target. The reason why I'm doing this is so that we sober up as we plan for the skills that we're planning for, the skills development that we're planning for. Right, what would have been the reason why we have so much investment that has not been met by committed rise in employment? Ladies and gentlemen, this seems to have been occasioned by the fact that 30 billion out of the 41 billion that we have amassed in investment comes from the offshore oil and gas. Now, what has it been used for? It has been used for seismic surveys and exploration, both of which demand specialized skill at very low numbers. So that the 30 billion would not have helped us achieve the employment targets that we have planned to. Further to that, several things that we can see in the performance of the ocean's economy in general, particularly the various focus areas, would tell you why we are not achieving. And it is those points or those parts where we're failing that we would need to pay attention to, because we do not have the luxury of time. Our biggest shareholder, the downtrodden majority of South Africans, are becoming impatient. I'm trying to say, as we sit here and plan, we do not have the luxury of time. Whatever skills we plan for, there's no room for mistakes. South Africans will not take kindly if you're gonna plan to train them in skills that will not be beneficial to them. Skills that will not change their material conditions. Now, let us look at what caused this failure, if we can call it failure. Now, if we take each and every one of these focus areas, you will find that only 2 focus areas are performing as per the dictates of Operation Pakistan, and that is offshore oil and gas and MPG. Offshore oil and gas performance has been 80% and above since 2014. MPG performance has been 69 and above since 2014. The rest of the performance areas have not been pulling their weight in terms of changing the mentality and the attitude of implementers to that of business unusual. So I want us to take that into account, and we'll see later on how we plan to resolve that. Be that as it may, there are some good news. The regulatory and fiscal clarity that was sought from the offshore oil and gas is about to be achieved, as the oil and gas bill is about to be finalized through negotiations between the industry and DMRE. Also, in aquaculture, several things were achieved, including the establishment of the interdepartmental work group that seeks to bring about a one-stop shop so that all issues relating to licenses for licensing and permitting for aquaculture are discussed within one group and agreed upon, so that we speed up the licensing process. Going further to MTM, at 19% performance, that is the lowest we have achieved, and as indicated to you, that is inconsistent with Operation Pakistan or PFR methodology. Yes, there are positive things that focus area has achieved, like the resuscitation of the ship repairs industry, as well as the approval of comprehensive maritime policy that was sought, while the TDI continues to apply pressure to ensure 70% local content for all manufactured goods within the MTM sector. The focus area called coastal and marine tourism is at 32%, despite promising to attract 102 billion within the time that the lab was supposed to have achieved all these aspirations. Now, in terms of MPG, we achieved several things, including Marine Special Planning Bill that was signed into law, declaration of 20 marine protected areas, and so on. We have achieved a lot on skills, and I'm not an expert on that, and I don't want to be talking to SAIMI about what they do. Now, the picture that I have painted is worrying. Is worrying for any ordinary South African. We said 5 years ago, we wanted to know how to accelerate the growth of the economy, and we identified various sectors as contributors to that growth, and we said we're going to approach this sectorally by growing each sector in a speedy manner. As I indicated to you, ladies and gentlemen, we have wasted 25 years through RTP, through ASGISA, through DA, and then we've got NTP. We brought this Operation Pakisa much late into the equation, only 5 years ago. But that we did that does not give us any more time. Because like I said, in the private sector, half of this room would have been fired ages ago if we continue to fail like we are doing. Now, what we're going to be doing here, we've got no room for failure. Because if you look outside, if you look at the news, you will see that the patience is running thin if it's not exhausted at all. So we do need to bring some sharp focus to these discussions to ensure that which we're going to do today will achieve the desired outcomes. Now, how do we resolve the situation? How do we change from what we have done in the last 5 years to what we had planned to do in the next 5 years? In order to answer this question, we need to look back to say where we borrowed this methodology. What is it that has helped them succeed? That is the only way that we can resolve this problem. And now, topmost within those answers, you will find that in Malaysia and in Tanzania, the BFR methodology is led from the highest office, that of the president or the head of government himself. The Operation Pakisa unit of Pemandu is not part of any department hidden within any branch within that department. So that the head of government takes leadership of the BFR methodology so that he is able to marshal resources as and when he feels there's a need. And the Operation Pakisa unit or its equivalent is able to report directly to the president as and when there's a need, so that the president is able to hold to account both the ministers as well as the private sector captains or industry captains, so that we keep our focus on achieving the desired end state. Further to that, we need to intensify our efforts to create an enabling environment so as to facilitate the ease of doing business, so that we reduce bureaucratic red tape and ease the fiscal and regulatory framework so that we can raise the levels of economic competitiveness of the economy to make it attractive to investors. Over and above that, in these two countries, both the political and the business elite are committed to change. And that change talks to how fast we implement, how fast we make decisions, the change from business as usual to business unusual. So that throughout government and throughout the private sector, whenever there is something to be done, it's not business as usual. We have not much respect for bureaucracy because it delays our implementation and therefore the achievement of the desired outcomes. All these things are things that we need to make sure that we implement so that we ensure the achievement of the desired end state. Last but not least, human capital. The availability of skill and human capital is critical for the success of any BFR methodology in any country. By and large, developing countries have been successful in turning their economies around because their programs were characterized by their deliberate interventions in skills development as well as capacity development, so that when the targeted industries take off, there is abundant local skill to support such development. Equally, such programs have to ensure localization of production, localization of supply chains, and localization of manufacturing. There ain't no point we grow an economy only to create opportunities for outsiders to come and exploit them, and then creating that tension between outsiders and internal people. Now, the questions that we need to answer in these next few days: do we have the right human capacity? Do we have the skills to support the growth of this sector? Do we have the correct mix? Do we have sufficient numbers to meet the demand? How reflective is this skill and human capital of the country's demographics? Because, ladies and gentlemen, I want to argue that in a country where the natural accident of race still determines the difference between wealth and destitution, it is hugely problematic to ignore the racial composition of skill as well as supply chain. The majority of shareholders are seething with anger as we seem not to be doing enough to make material difference in their lived experiences. This has brought us to a point where South Africa has become a nation in emergency. I want to challenge each one of us here. If you have not yet realized that we are a nation in emergency, I don't know where you have been living. Because every time you wake up and you switch on the TV, you will find there's an emergency somewhere. Emergency, not the way you define emergency, a national emergency that we need to attend to. So this has brought us to that situation. The situation is likely to deteriorate if we do not do something drastic to redeem ourselves from an impending national destabilization. Since we owe a debt not only for our good luck, but for the bad luck of others, we should all be willing to declare that we can cast our fate with the poor of this country. There should come a point in future where all South Africans are able to look back to see how far we have come from in relation to where we were in 2014. And they realize we could not have come this far had it not have been the way we came. That will be determined by what this collective comes up with in the next few days. The skill sets that we're going to determine as very critical for the development of the sector. The numbers that we're going to be determined as critical for the development of the sector. The mix, both demographically and otherwise, will determine whether South Africans will look back to this collective in much the same way that Africa looks back to the Berlin Conference and say, if we could reverse the Berlin Conference, we would not have been where we are. Now, in a positive way, I want South Africans to look back at this conference and say, we would not have come this far had it not been for the results or the outcomes of this conference that were implemented subsequent to the decisions made in this conference. Thank you, Prof.